Greetings, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be joining in from. My name is Michael Kulma, and I'm the head of programs and communications at International House at the University of Chicago. As we celebrate Earth Week, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this virtual conversation, Agriculture 2.0, how technological innovation can help us sustainably feed 10 billion people and save our planet. I would like to acknowledge and thank International House at UC Berkeley, International Students House in London, the Good Food Institute, and One Shared World for partnering with us on this program. We're in for a really thought-provoking conversation today. Today's program is one of many held annually by International House at the University of Chicago as part of our Global Lecture Series programs. The Global Voices Lecture Series hosts prominent speakers, roundtable discussions, and conferences and seminars on a wide range of topics. As part of this program, leading voices from around the world come to share their thoughts, expertise, and exchange ideas on major issues facing the country and the world. Today's virtual discussion fits that programming mission perfectly. As we recognize Earth Day this week, we're reminded that when it began in 1970, it included nationwide environmental teach-ins that educated Americans about environmental and conservation issues. We are continuing with that tradition today as we recognize our global interdependence. It's no secret that over the centuries, technological advancement has altered the way we farm. With the evolving landscape around biotech, genetics, and AI, agricultural productivity is ripe for innovation and advancement. As this agricultural productivity takes shape, it is vital to the earth and to our well-being that we find ways to encourage more natural and regenerative agricultural processes, utilize emerging green technologies, and exchange innovative ideas across borders, particularly with respect to our food systems. That's why I'm excited about today's conversation and the expert panelists who will help us along on this journey. I want to thank those speakers for today and briefly introduce them. We have with us David Kaplan, the Stern Family Professor in Engineering, Biomedical Engineering at Tufts University; Jamie Metzl, a good friend and founder and chair of One Shared World, and author of the recently released Superconvergence: How the Genetics, Biotech, and AI Revolutions Will Transform Our Lives, Work, and World; and Argadeep Saha, Policy Manager at the Good Food Institute in India. I also want to thank and introduce our moderator for today's conversation, Shagun Sethi, PhD candidate in sociology at Purdue University and Director of Global Leadership at One Shared World. Thank you all for joining us. Shagun, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mike, for that introduction, and I am delighted to be here with such an esteemed panel. I think as we celebrate Earth Week, or Earth Day, a couple of days ago, one of the things that's been on my mind at least is how resources exist in such variation across the world. We have some countries where food is going to waste every day, and there are like mountains and mountains of like waste, landfills of products that have never been used. And then there are countries where their children are not able to access healthy meals and nutrition on a daily basis. So I think that this is a conversation that's timely, it's important, and I say this quite often to people who I'm just generally talking to, where I'm like, we had the Industrial Revolution, and that changed the way the world is, and now we're having a technological revolution almost with the introduction of AI. And so we need to think about how we use this moment in time, moment in history to create a world that's interdependent and one that's for all of us. And so with that, I'm excited to like start off with a conversation on, maybe for the sake of our audience and maybe even for me, because I'm not well versed with this, could you all tell us a little about yourselves and also how your work is related to technological innovation in agriculture or food in general? So I'm going to start with David, and then Argadeep, and then Jamie.
Happy to. Thank you, Shagun. So I'm here in Boston at Tufts University, and one of the things I lead is a very active program in the field of cellular agriculture. And cellular agriculture is the concept and technology to essentially almost eliminate animals from the food production process, just needing their cells, and then really taking a biotechnological approach to generating protein-rich foods, nutritious foods, healthy foods in a safe and equitable fashion. And I think the opportunity is really to build on this emerging technology, as I see as a real pillar going forward for feeding 10 billion people, and doing it in concert with AI, because I think AI is going to empower this new emerging technology to just move forward much more quickly than it has been able to date in many facets. And we can talk about that during the time. And I think the opportunities are endless here. So happy to get into more details as we go through the hour.
Thank you. You're doing really, really important work, and I'm excited to hear what others are doing, but also dive deeper into your work, event and how AI can truly harness that. But Argadeep, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work?
Sure, Shagun. Thank you. Good evening from India to everyone who's tuned in, and to my esteemed panelists as well. My name is Argadeep Saha, and I am the policy manager at Good Food Institute India. Before I get into anything else, I would first like to quickly thank One Shared World and the International House at U Chicago for extending the invitation to GFI India. For those of you who might not be aware, Good Food Institute India is part of an international network of affiliate organizations who works on catalyzing and kickstarting the alt protein ecosystem around the world. We have 7 representations spread around the world, from Europe to Japan, with offices in the US, in Israel, in Brazil, in India, and in APAC. Among other things, what GFI does is essentially work across industry, which basically means working with corporates and startups, working with governments and policymakers, and a range of government institutions, multilateral institutions, bilateral institutions, as well as with academics and university, to catalyze and bring together different these levers to bring together and work on catalyzing the alt protein ecosystem. Prior to GFI, I bring about a decade's worth of experience at the intersection of social policy and research issues around rural livelihoods, sustainable agriculture, development, primarily from a global South and India perspective. At GFI, my work has kind of catapulted to a slightly different way of how now to think about how innovative technology like alt proteins can be used to push the sustainable food systems narrative in a global South context. Look forward to more details into the conversation. Thanks, Shava.
Thanks, Argadeep. And the man who needs no introduction now, Jamie, over to you.
Thanks so much, Shagun, and thanks to Mike and David and Argadeep and the partnering, sponsoring organizations. I'm Jamie Metzl. I'm the founder and chair of One Shared World, but One Shared World wouldn't exist but for the great work of Shagun and Mike and other really incredible volunteers all around the world. I'm a technology futurist, which just means that for decades I've been thinking about the implications of revolutionary technologies transforming our world. It's my last book before Superconvergence was Hacking Darwin, focusing on the future of human genetic engineering. And when I started doing a lot of speaking about human genetic engineering, I kept explaining to people this is just one little piece of a bigger story. And the bigger story is that this is a unique moment in the history of planet Earth, where our one species among the billions that's ever lived suddenly has the unique and growing ability to engineer novel intelligence and re-engineer life. And the big question for the future of the planet, at least as we know it, is whether we can learn to use these powers wisely. And as the questions that I was asking expanded, first in the context of human health, with the birth of the CRISPR babies, and Dr. Tedros invited me to be a member of the World Health Organization Expert Advisory Committee on Human Genome Editing, as we've talked about in these contexts earlier in earlier sessions. Then it was growing, saying, well, what are the interfaces between humanity and life? And that's why in my most recent book and a lot of my work now, I'm talking about agriculture, because agriculture is in many ways that interface. It's what has allowed us to go to the 8 billion now, moving towards 10 billion people a few short decades from now. And in our world, which is entirely enabled by technology, the question for us is not whether or not we should use technologies, it's how we should best use technologies to achieve our goals, which is a sustainable planet, an equitable planet where we can have the resources that we need to grow, and all of life on Earth can have the conditions that will best enable it to thrive.
Thanks, Jamie. And I think that's a really good point because, someone who doesn't work in AI or even technology at all, I think, it is something that is getting integrated more and more in my work, but also into like everyone's work. And, the people who harness it now and start like working towards it now are the ones who are going to be the winners in the next decade. And that's kind of where it becomes important for us to share these assets with everyone, because till everyone doesn't get it, then we are going to continue living in a world that we've been in. So with that in mind,
Shagun, if I could just have one small correction.
Sure.
You said you don't work in technology, but you do work in technology. And this is an essential point. We all work in technology. Yeah. Therefore, everybody must have a voice in shaping this future that we are all part of. This isn't a question where there are technologists over here and humanity over here. This is a question that humanity is harnessing these superpowers, and therefore we must all be part of the process of figuring out how they can best be applied. Sorry for that quick intervention.
No, that's actually important as an interruption, because I think a lot of times, and we might have a lot of people in the audience who are, tuning in as students in the International House and just members of One Shared World and the world at large, where we feel like, okay, maybe technology is not our thing, but it is all our thing. And so I guess in that vein, could you all maybe describe one breakthrough that you think is poised to hit the market in the next 2 or 3 years, and the main governance challenges it raises, or challenges in general that a breakthrough in AI and biotech could raise? I will start the other way around now. So Jamie, do you want to get us started?
Okay, yeah, sure. So for sure, there will be specific applications where something will show up that didn't exist before, or show up at scale that we haven't experienced before. And people will say, wow, that's amazing. And it could be different kinds of crop products or animal products or AI tools like ChatGPT. But what I would say, the real story, from my mind, of what's the most significant thing is not all of these sexy single story applications. If I had asked our listeners to this audio, how has electricity influenced your life today? It's an unanswerable question, because electricity is part of everything. And so these tools are going to empower everything that we do. They're going to speed up our process of scientific advancement and technological innovation. Little things like if you're doing a trial for how to grow new crops or for a new drug, we'll be able to do them in more efficient ways. So like electricity, where you could imagine just how everything got accelerated, I think that will be the story that people will remember, and things will show up. And just connected to our brief interaction before, people won't say, oh, this is AI. They'll just say this is cool, or this is helpful. And so that this story, like electricity, is just going to get woven into everything.
Argadeep, what do you think of what's coming?
Yes, I'm trying to now complement what Jamie just said. And if I look back and I look what's happening in, for example, in India, for example, when you think about how AI and biotechnology is influencing food systems and conversations around agriculture, you see there's a lot happening already, right? If I focus specifically on AI for a second, I already see a lot of technological developments and constant improvements in things like, for example, farmers being able to detect pests and diseases just using their phone cameras, right? So that's a great low-cost application of AI, right? There is, I see hyperlocal predictive modeling for weather patterns, which allows farmers to make better decisions, right? That's a great application of low-cost AI. If I had to speak personally from our work at Good Food Institute India, one of the breakthroughs that we are eagerly looking forward to is the application of local climate positive indigenous crops in alternative proteins for applications in plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy. There's work going on, which the GFI India is a close partner to, on the application of millets, which are traditional, like millions of years old crops that have been in India in the creation of these alternatives. And there's also work going on in how do you develop methods for more efficient and more sustainable extraction of proteins from these kind of crops, right? Because current methods can sometimes be expensive and are not always suited for low resource settings. So these are a couple of really key breakthroughs that we are eagerly looking forward to, and because we're actively engaged as an institution in these projects, we are hoping that in the next 3 years, 5 years, we will get to hear some positive news. In terms of governance challenges, I think one of the key, a few of the key rather, problems associated with these kind of work, these kind of novel work is it's very hard in India to sometimes translate lab work, research work into commercializing it, because the industry academia partnerships are not always that strong in India. There are also bureaucratic hurdles. There's also a problem with generally how research is incentivized sometimes in Indian academic institutions, where academics are not really encouraged and do not have sufficient incentive to do sort of market-oriented, application-oriented research. So there are these governance challenges, if you could call them, that we see could be bottlenecks in translating these R&D, lab R&D level findings into commercial industrial level applications.
Thanks, Argadeep. And I think in line with everything that you said, not only is it really important because I'm also from India. We come from contexts where such innovation needs to reach the masses, right? Like it can't exist within the lab and die in the lab. Like it really needs to get out. And so I think that we're on the cusp of that happening and channeling these good energies. Like Jamie said, it's going to be everywhere. It's not going to be something that's like seen as this one-off thing. It's really important to not only educate ourselves on what's happening, but also think about how we can spread it. David, I'm really curious to hear about your work on proteins, but also just in general, think about what's next.
Yeah, I guess I'd echo a bit of what Jamie said. I think I look at how we're going to produce this food of the future as the electricity, right? It's going to become that normal, whether it's 3 years from now or 30 years from now. I don't have that answer, but that's why AI will clearly propel us forward. So I look at the fact that the technology to develop this cellular agricultural approach is really long overdue, first of all, right? Biotech and other methods have affected crops already to make us have more and better crops available, but it really hasn't impacted animals and animal proteins in ways that it could and should. And so the field is making great progress. But if you read all of the sort of challenges ahead, right there, low cost media ingredients, how to make sure cells are safe, how to scale up, all of those are making progress. But AI is now starting to impact every single one of those barriers or challenges. And so I see over the next couple of years, huge sort of leaps in these technologies to get them more accessible to the common market. And once that starts, you'll start to see this kind of steamroll as, oh, why aren't we doing this already? Why have we waited so long? If you think of the way we're producing, protein rich foods, meats and things, it's really hasn't changed in our lifetime and lifetimes before. And you're stuck with very long reproductive cycles to make changes. You're limited on those changes you can make. With this new emerging technology, cellular agriculture, you have complete control of that process. You can do the changes very fast. You can make informed decisions with AI about nutrition, health, and safety. And this just will propel us forward. We've just got to get over these humps. And AI, I think, can really help globally do this very quickly.
And I think that that's really inspiring, right? Jamie, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. If I could just add to what David and Argadeep said to put it in a little bit of context. So right now, about half of all arable land on Earth goes toward agriculture. The rest are all of our forests and wild spaces that we need to have a survivable planet. about 3/4 of all of that is used to support animal agriculture in one way or another, whether it's grazing lands or producing foods to feed our domesticated animals. And because the human population has quadrupled over the last century, the needs for that land and all of the water and other resources are growing exponentially at an unsustainable rate. In addition, some of the poorest people in the world are getting wealthier, which is exactly what we want. And as they do, they want what we wanted, our ancestors wanted, is to have healthy, sustainable, balanced diet, which for most people on Earth, other than the wonderful most of the people in India, and we should all be emulating Indian vegetarianism, which would solve most of our problems actually, but is to have the resources that we need. People imagine some kind of traditional farm for how these animals are being grown, but 70% of these animals are being grown in industrial animal farms, which are often quite horrible places. And that is, eating animals is something our ancestors have done for a long time. But these kinds of industrial animal farms are very, very recent. So the thing that is being disrupted, that I think everybody on this in this panel would like to disrupt, is not the ancient practice of humans consuming animal products. It's for these animal products that we are consuming at such a scale that we are totally decimating our planet, with huge implications for environment, climate, water, deforestation, pandemics, not to mention cruelty to animals, that we can solve these relatively new problems using technology. And people say, well, that doesn't sound natural or normal. We need to be reminded that agriculture itself is one of the most aggressive forms of biotechnology ever invented by humans. Our ancestors, 13,000 years ago and beyond, didn't have agriculture. Agriculture is a human invention, which it's another name people use is nature co-design. We've taken these ingredients in nature and are redirecting them. And so, yes, I know people are uncomfortable with the application of technology to nature, but we are talking here about the application of technology to technology. So sorry for this long statement, but I just wanted to put a little context underneath what we're all talking about.
Whoops, now I was on mute. But no, Jamie, that's really helpful and important. I guess I'm going to ask one more question before I get into a little bit of a rapid fire for all of you, because I know we have a bunch of questions from the audience already, and I want to leave time for that. So I guess this is going to be something that's a little bit, again, more generic and taking a step back. But where do you think innovators need to focus first? Right? We know we need to pay attention to all of what's happening, and everyone's spoken about the importance of it. But where do you think we need to focus first to ensure equitable impact of agricultural advancement through AI? The world has benefited from so many advancements we've seen in the food industry in general, right? But the impact has not been equitable. We've seen some places and some countries win more than others. And so I'm curious about what you all think needs to be the first point that innovators need to focus on to ensure equitable impact. And David, this time around, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Shagun. I quickly comes to mind two points I can make. One is the technology I'm referring to that we focus on, which again is using cells from animals and not the whole animal, to use a biotechnology approach. That is a very, what I would call, modular and scalable approach to food. And so you can envision these systems, and we are working on innovation, and other labs are as well, where they could be very small units that you could have in a house to a small community. It could be a rural community, but also they could be scaled up, modularized to a large city, and so on. So I think one thing to keep in mind for innovation is how can it be used in a scalable fashion, yet all the ingredients are available to everyone to drive the process. And that's the second point I would make, is those ingredients would be locally sourced, right? You want to eliminate having to transport all these sugars and vitamins across a country or across the seas. So you want AI to help point to available resources locally that can be used, simply processed, and then incorporated into the food production process. So these are just two examples in my mind how we keep this a very scalable, equitable enterprise that everyone in principle should benefit from.
Yeah, I really like that. I was in a grocery store actually last week, and a friend of mine said we're going to have to start eating by the season now. And I was really confused by that, because I was like, what do you mean? Because growing up in India, that's what we do, right? Like there are winter foods that we eat in the winter, and there's summer foods that we eat in the summer, and then we do eat by the season. But it was a very foreign concept to some of my friends here in America, because you just go to the grocery store and despite the season, everything is just there. And like you said, David, it's been transported across not only states but countries, and that's not sustainable, and that's not that doesn't inform equitable access. But Argadeep, you're from India, you've been through these experiences as I have. What do you think is the first point that people need to focus on to ensure equitable access? Go ahead.
Thanks, Shagun. I think the fundamental priorities of innovation and technology infusion in agri-food systems will be more or less consistent around the world. I think increased productivity, making sure that we produce the most using the least amount of inputs, making sure that the ecological footprint of what we do in terms of producing our food is reduced. All of those things are pretty much going to be consistent, I think, around the world. But when you talk about equity, I think the conversation can get a bit more nuanced based on the context. For example, if I just look back at what's happening in India, no matter how we put it, we are essentially an agrarian country where more than 50% of our population is dependent on agriculture. And that means significantly more than the combined population of the entire European Union depends on agriculture in India. So when you talk about cellular agriculture, when you talk about alternative proteins, the way we at JFI India have been thinking about is that just transition piece, because that's very, very critical in India. Agriculture is a political conversation as much as it's anywhere else, if not more. But the fact that it's also such a sensitive issue, because most of these people who work on the agricultural supply chain from the farm to the consumer plate, they are mostly people who with limited skills, limited access to resources, limited access to infrastructure, limited in the sense that many of them can't consistently afford data packs on their smartphones, even if they do have smartphones, assuming they have smartphones. So that is the kind of context we are talking about. One way that we are looking at it is that, so if we are talking about alternative proteins and food, like novel technology in food processing in the Indian context, one way to do that is how do you make farmers part of the value chain? So it shouldn't be that farmers just providing inputs to these new emerging industries, because if that's how it happens, with increasing productivity and with production moving away from farms to these factories, if I might just use the term, like sustainable factories, if I could just call them, what would that mean is that many of these people who currently depend on agriculture there would be a period of transition, and that's what we're calling just transition, right? We have to create opportunities where these farmers, where the newer generation of agriculture workers are skilled enough to work at these facilities, right? They're given the right training, they're given the right education, they have access to the right infrastructure to kind of adapt to this new model of how we produce our food. So that is a very critical piece of when we think about equitable impacts of AI and biotechnology and novel technologies on agricultural systems.
Jamie, let's shift gears a bit. We're all talking about the present, I guess, and thinking about like what's happening in and around us. You're a futurist. As someone who spends, like you said in your words, time thinking about the future, what do you think should be the first point from a future perspective?
Ironically or not ironically, it's exactly what we just heard in response to the equity question. When we look back at the Green Revolution, yes, some of the science was significantly US science, but the innovations in the crops came from observing crops in Japan, and the real field trials happened in Mexico. And then when there was the expansion to places like India, you had giants like MS Swaminathan who helped apply these technologies. So we live in a world of decentralized capabilities. It's the same point I was making earlier about electricity. But we shouldn't think about equity just within an equity frame. It's not that, oh, we have this great thing and how can it be distributed? It's that to have an optimally great thing, we need to incorporate the voices and perspectives of the end users. And whether it's scientists around the world who are contributing to the science, whether it's the farmers, whether it's the consumers, this is an all of society transition, whether people recognize it or not. Just like domestication of plants and animals and industrialization were society level transitions, and maybe few people got there first, and some people it took maybe a generation or two. So we will have a better outcome if we incorporate the perspectives of everybody who is part of this process. When we think about changes in plant agriculture using all of these capabilities, yes, there's a lot of focus now on the global staples, corn, wheat, and rice. But people in some of the more vulnerable parts of the world, certainly Africa, are traditionally reliant on a wider range of crops. So just like in healthcare, we have orphan diseases, and part of the changes in healthcare now are recognizing that rare diseases are rare individually, but not rare collectively. These quote unquote orphan crops, excuse me, may be not as widespread as the broader staples. But what we want to do is empower people. We want to empower farmers and local producers to produce what they're producing, but just do it in a better way. And it's the same with the producers of animal agricultural products. And that requires, we're already experiencing the decentralization of technologies, but we need to help people be part of this process. Again, it's not just for them, it's for us. David talked about going to scale. What does going to scale mean? It means people being comfortable with these products and using them and incorporating them into their lives. So I do think that that this is all about values ultimately, and we need to integrate the values, not just we have a thing, how do we distribute it? It's we are building a thing, how can we best build it together?
I love that, Jamie, and I appreciate you saying that we need to build it back together. We have so many questions from the audience, so I am going to make sure that we get there. But before that, I have a rapid fire for all of you. So I just want you to, give me the quickest answer that you can, a couple of sentences. And Argadeep, I'm going to start with you for this one. For the layperson, the common person who doesn't know much about agriculture, doesn't know about AI, what does this and all of what we've spoken about mean? What can and should they do to be part of this movement?
Right. I think even if someone who is not directly linked with the agri-foods conversation or is not working in the space in a direct or indirect way, I think what anyone and everyone should do is start asking questions about where their food comes from, how is it produced, how is it sourced. I think that is something that we all need to be actively start recognizing, actively start asking questions, hold companies accountable, hold ourselves accountable really, to make sure that whoever and wherever we can afford to consume the foods that are better for the planet and better for our own health, we move to those kind of food choices, making sure that things that we know are have significant high impact on climate, we gradually start cutting them out from our diets and reduce them to the extent possible. I think those are some of the more fundamental basic choices that all of us can make as consumers. And when we start making those choices and when we start asking those questions, companies who are in the business of influencing our choices also kind of have to eventually pay heed to it in some way or the other.
Thanks, Argadeep. David, I'm going to ask you now, if the audience had to leave with one key takeaway from this conversation, what would you say it should be?
I would say that the audience should be very, very excited about what food is going to look like, taste like, and be like in the future in ways you can't even imagine yet today, right? Because again, coming back to the technology I'm talking about, you're used to, wherever you are in the world, you're used to a certain set of foods you're comfortable with every day. That's your social structure, the availability, the cost structure, et cetera. With the technology we're talking about here, cellular agriculture, you can generate protein-rich foods from any organism on the planet. It doesn't matter whether it's been previously domesticated or not. So palates, tastes, flavors are just going to boom, and you're going to have opportunities you've never thought about before. So my one message to consumers is be open to trying new things. That's number one. And number two, we're going to be able to achieve nutritionally enhanced foods in ways that have never been possible before. So you can, again, I'm giving you two take-home messages, apologies, but it's whatever your lifespan and healthiness is, where you are, where you live, what you eat today, think about how much more that's going to improve by having fresher, healthier, tastier foods going forward. I think we're just starting to tap into this unbelievable technology opportunity. We need to do it right, and we need to use AI, and I think we're going to have an amazing future here. So those are my messages for the consumer.
Thank you, David. And Jamie, coming back to you, considering that there are lots of people who are scared of some of these advancements, right? There are so many conversations happening about AI is going to rule the world and we're going to lose our jobs and things like that. What would you say to skeptics? What would you say to people who are a little worried about what's happening in the field of technological evolution? As a futurist, how do we kind of adopt this movement and understand the benefits of it, at the same time weigh our skepticisms, weigh our anxieties? Yep.
Yeah, it's a great question, Shagun. And what I always say is, excuse me, anxiety exists for a reason. It's not some kind of wasted historical byproduct that we're just carrying it around. Our anxieties are real in that they say, hey, things could go wrong. And with every technology, things could go wrong. As great as the vision is that we all believe in, everything can go wrong. So those anxieties are healthy. We have to listen to those anxieties. We need to engage people in these conversations about how to build this future. And as I said before, people don't recognize that our existence is mediated in so many ways by our technologies, different than every other animals, including the chimpanzees that poke sticks into anthills and the dolphins who scratch each other with sponges. We live in a world of technology. And the things that we are consuming, like agriculture, are themselves technology. But if we race forward, like happened, I mean, the first generation of transgenic crops are a warning, because it's certainly my view, and I've been outspoken about this, that what people call GMOs, when used responsibly, are actually an incredible contribution to humanity. But because the public wasn't engaged sufficiently in those conversations, not just being educated, but it's education, engagement, empowerment, involvement, thinking about how do we build this kind of future together, we got into this either or. Like either we have transgenic crops or we have what people feel are natural crops, but which are actually genetically modified crops, which were modified by our ancestors who just had different words for what they were doing. So we need to listen to those fears, and we need to bring people into the conversation about, just like David was doing, here's what's possible. Now, I have friends in different parts of the world, including Africa, who are very stressed by climate, stressed by traditional crops not growing, stressed by animals not being able to thrive in ways that they have done in the past. So we're not saying, hey, here comes technology. We're saying you have a problem and we'd like to work with you as partners to try to solve this problem and to build a better future. And that's why the Green Revolution is a great example of this. India, Mexico, every part of the world, the history of our species is that we've had these terrible droughts that have killed hundreds of thousands, millions of people. Now other than the context of civil wars, we don't really have that. And the reason we don't have that is not just technology, it's the social infusion of technology. And this is not a story ultimately about technologies, it's about values and community and governance.
Thanks, Jamie. And I will now stop my questions, even though I have a million more for all three of you. And I'm going to turn it over to the audience now. So we have a question, and I'm gonna channel this to you, Argadeep. With AI and big data becoming integral to modern farming, how can we ensure that farmer data is protected and used ethically?
I think a lot of it depends here. The role of governments becomes really important. Ensuring that there is a clear policy on how human subject data should be stored, how they should be maintained, how they can be accessed, how they are supposed to be anonymized for open access use. A lot of these things should be regulated by national governments. Data policy is something that I think many countries are already grappling with. That's why you see many of these big tech companies being questioned by EU authorities. Things like that are a kind of direction to which governments are sort of fearing, I think. The fact that so much data is being collected by many of these organizations, which can be sensitive if not, handled the right way. But I think the responsibility in many ways will come down to having the right regulatory framework and the right approach by governments, not to stifle innovation. I think that's also another key thing to keep in mind. That over-regulation sometimes also stifles innovation. So finding that balance between ensuring safety while also ensuring that innovation is also encouraged.
David, I have a couple of questions that would be exciting for you, I guess. So the first one for you is, organic produce is what we preferred, but are we truly consuming what we believe to be organic? Can AI innovations offer reliable verification to address consumer skepticism?
Yeah, I think there's great opportunity to marry AI with questions of food safety, food quality, and food nutrition, all related to however we want to define truly organic or not. Back to Jamie's point, the biotech revolution for crops, these crops, if done properly, can actually enhance human well-being by providing better crops, healthier crops, safer crops, nutritious crops. So I think we have to take that lens with the food, protein-rich foods, all proteins, and meats that we're going to produce this way, and make sure AI guides number one, safety, number two, health, and number three, nutrition and benefit. And I think if we do that, it's going to be a win, because those are all positive attributes that any consumer wants for their food.
So I'm going to ask you another one, and I have a question from Wendy, and Wendy's asked two questions, which I'm going to club together. But Wendy says, it's my understanding that our gut microbiome recognizes genetically modified crops, and therefore it's not proving to be nutritionally better. Wendy also said that why is there not a focus on growing more vegetables and legumes for adequate nutrition for everyone, and leave animals entirely out of the equation? What do you think?
Yeah, I can take the first one first. I think you have to separate these two steps. One is what happens in your gut with metabolism and your microbiome. The second is what then gets taken up through your intestinal walls into your bloodstream to feed your cells in your body, right? And so, Wendy, you're right. The microbiome doesn't really distinguish genetically engineered versus non-engineered cells. That's crops, I should say. That's pretty clear. But the products of that metabolism are what become different. So, they may be enhanced in a specific amino acid that's critical, like lysine is very commonly needed. And so you get more lysine in the digest from the microbiome, more of it gets taken up in your gut, and you're healthier because of that. So I'm not sure that helps, but there's two steps there you have to think about in the whole process. The second question was, I think there's a lot of work going on in the world of how to grow more and larger, better vegetables and legumes. There's quite a bit of crop engineering, a lot of vertical farming, a lot of other efforts to continue to do that. Despite every attempt that I'm aware of and have read about, you're not going to get people to eat less meat. It just doesn't happen. If you're used to eating meat, you still want to eat it. As you become a more economically viable country, oftentimes meat becomes the coin that you want to use to show your status. And so there have been many attempts to do this, Wendy, and I agree with you. It'd be great to get people to eat less meat. It just doesn't happen. So those are consumer surveys that are needed and continue to be done, but we've got to look at the whole equation here, because people are used to eating meat. They're going to want to eat meat. We just need to do it in a more sustainable fashion.
Thank you, David. Jamie, I have a question that you're going to love, which is, how does policy play into not only the relations of big data, but to promoting alternative sources to protein, as Sarah, but I would ask you for, in general, alternative sources for nutrients and nutrition. And then this is my favorite part of the question, because I think you're an expert at this. How can we incorporate the voices of newer generations?
Yeah, those are really important questions. And I think of policy as just one piece in a bigger story of governance. And you mentioned my new book, Superconvergence. In the last chapter of Superconvergence, I have a pyramid. And at the base of the pyramid, oops, hold on one sec. I'm sorry, I'm having computer issues. At the base of the pyramid is individual education engagement, and most importantly, empowerment. And then there's community engagement, and there's national engagement and national jurisdictions, and there's international and global. And all of these pieces are together. And so policy is a piece of that. But if we think of policy and regulation in isolation, then actually we'll start to do ourselves some harm. So we really need to think about all of these things together in order for us to move forward together. And then that's why we need to think about these animal systems, about animal agriculture, because it's so essential to how we eat, and to plants. And we need to do that in a collaborative way with everybody, because there are plenty of examples in history of things which are technically the right answer. Like technically, if you did X at scale, you could solve a problem, but it doesn't sometimes happen within the context of our very complex human societies. And so now we have these new tools, and the same tools writ large that are allowing us to have these technological innovations are also give us the opportunity to have social innovations, not just in educating people, but in engaging people in thoughtful conversations about how to build our best possible future.
And then the second part of the question is, how do we incorporate the newer generations into such a movement, and newer voices and younger people?
Yeah. Well, Shagun, I would like to turn it on you, because you yourself embody that question. I mean, certainly with One Shared World, when we together started with the vision that I think everybody shares, is that right now there's a mismatch between the superpowers, the ability of our species to do things on a global scale, and the absence of a sufficient governance and accountability frameworks for doing so together responsibly. And that's why from the beginning with One Shared World, it was all about empowering next generations as full partners in everything, and not to open up the kimono, but it's why you are leading this conversation as a way of making that statement. So rather than me answering that question, Shagun, I'd love for you to answer that question.
Thanks, Jamie. I think one of the things I say very often, and I've said this before, is that young people are often treated and spoken of as the leaders of the future. And that's not true. We're the leaders of the present. We're the ones who, the decisions we make, the work we do, the people we are and become, are the ones who are going to shape the world that we live in. And so every time that, I'm on a table and I recognize that, these are people who I'm sitting with who are super accomplished, who have done incredible things. And I'm questioning myself. I remember, Jamie, the first time I met you, I was 22, and we were starting One Shared World, and the board of directors was like Jamie Metzel and Michael Kalma, and and everyone on that table was just more than a superstar. Like, people who I would dream of would just be my mentors. And I remember a point where I was like, wow, I'm in this room and I'm part of this conversation. But I wasn't just feeling lucky to be part of it. I felt like I belonged there. Like I didn't have to feel like I did something crazy to be there. I was there because I should be there. And I think that's a switch, a mindset switch that I would encourage young people in general, students, whether you're a researcher like I am right now, or someone working in the industry. More than anyone else, your opinion matters. And sometimes it's hard to believe that, but just fake it till you make it, as Rihanna says. And just, you need to just show up and you need to be on those tables, even if chairs are not there. Just sit on top of the table, is my kind of argument. I have one last question for all of you, because I think this is a really good question that someone's asked in the chat, and I think I want to field it to each and every one of you. We have a question that says that what will be the bottlenecks for these food technologies to be scaled up? And Manon is actually a little bit more of a description. The question is, how do you think production infrastructures and feedback will scale with genetic advances for food and feed or energy production? But I think the essence of that question is that, what will be the bottlenecks for food technology to be scaled up? And so I'm going to just go in reverse order this time. Jamie, starting with you.
Yeah, so scale is a really important issue. I mean, there are lots of innovations that we can do at small scale that can't scale hugely. And because we're talking about biological systems, and despite all of our advances, we still are far from understanding the full complexity of biology. So there certainly are scaling issues. But the good news is, and again, it's the title of my new book, Superconvergence, it's not that the people in the world of agriculture are on their own having to solve problems. All of these problems, challenges that we are trying to overcome are common across multiple fields. So just last year with the Nobel Prizes, the main winners of the Nobel Prizes for physics and chemistry were neither physicists nor chemists, respectively. And what that was telling us is there are a lot of different fields that are contributing to other fields. And so, we have just built-in infrastructures. I mean, we are about 100 years from the beginning of the age of really the significant age of fossil fuels, certainly the industrial use of oil and gas. So we have a century of infrastructure. We have a lot of infrastructure in agriculture that's invested in doing things in traditional ways. And that's why you're seeing these pushbacks in places that have banned cultivated meat in places where it doesn't yet exist, like Texas or Italy, because there are just these fears, and there are people who are part of existing systems that feel that this is a threat. So I do feel that when we think about scaling, we need to think about it in multiple ways. One is certainly scaling the technology, and there are lots of scientific and technological breakthroughs that are still required to do this stuff, which we know we can do at small scale, to do it at big scale. But there's also all the things that we've been discussing: social engagement, creating regulatory environments. The good news is, and some of them have been mentioned here, there are just smaller places that are establishing themselves as hubs for moving things forward. And whether it's the United Arab Emirates or Singapore or the Netherlands. So that is the nice thing, is that we can have little laboratory places where you can experiment, not just with the science, but science, regulation, social engagement, and build models that can ideally be replicated elsewhere.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm going to go to you, Argadeep.
Thanks, Shagun. Thanks for starting us off on that note, Jamie. I think if I add from a very global south sort of perspective, I think the fundamental challenge that we need to solve for is cost. Food is a low margin business in the developing world, and anything that we do at scale, it has to not just have economies of scale, as we like to call it, But in more simpler words, the cost of value addition cannot be more than the value addition. Sorry, I framed it the wrong way. The cost of value addition cannot be more than the value addition itself. That has been a problem that that some of these technologies have currently been facing, and I'm sure that a lot of smart people are working on it, and there would be breakthroughs on many of these things. One of the technologies that we have been really working on and have been having conversations is on biomass fermentation, which basically involves using microorganisms to feed on a feedstock, which can be, right now it's mostly purified glucose. It can be other things as well that can lead to the generation of like a protein-rich biomass. That is a scalable model that has already been done in many parts of the world. The challenge, among other things, in a context like in a context like India, is the cost part. The infrastructure, setting up the infrastructure and doing it at scale makes the ultimate product more costly than most consumers can afford. So I think the affordability piece is going to be very critical as a bottleneck to scale it up in sort of lower income settings.
I can agree with that. David, over to you.
Yeah, I think for this field to really boom and really get going, I think there's got to be more public financial support to really help catalyze growth. And as you heard from the other panelists, I mean, you're seeing that already in what I would call the food insecure countries, like Singapore, United Arab Emirates, others. And so there's that start, right? But I don't think you see it yet in that level of investment generally in Europe and the US. You're starting to see some of it in China. So it's starting to happen, but I think we need more public support. And I think, this just reflects any new technology that could be potentially somewhat disruptive, right? It takes time for people to get on board. You're going to have some real seismic examples happen to get people to really wake up. And a good example for this field is there is no mass-produced cell ag food product yet today that somebody could go buy, right? And so until that is available, people, it's more like a myth. It's not a reality yet to a lot of consumers, right? So we need some of those examples to start getting out there enough so people see it's real, and then they can really start to process and think about what that potential is. So I think that has to come along with public investment, and then I think we'll see real growth going forward.
Thank you so much, David, and everyone. I think this has been such an interesting talk, not just for me, but for our audience. I see so many interesting questions that have been popped up, and I am just grateful to hear and be able to have this conversation. I want to close by thanking all our speakers, Jamie, David, and Argadeep. Thank you so much for your time, generosity of your knowledge sharing. I think that's the only way we can create a world where such things are no longer scary, also have equitable impact, everyone. I also want to thank our partners, the International Houses of Chicago and London, the Good Food Institute, and all our partners at One Shared World. I encourage you to visit our website and sign the Declaration of Interdependence at oneshared.world. And with that, I will see you all next time, but thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Shagun.